Hello and welcome to Abbitt Media. I'm Abbitt and today I'm going to be talking about composition. Now composition is something that's often left out by 3D artists. They spend so much time on their models, by the time they've finished those they quickly plonk them into a scene and press render. Composition can take a really basic scene and make it look amazing. It can also do the reverse and take an amazing scene and make it look dreadful. So in this video I'm going to give you a practical example of how I've changed a composition from this into this. I'm going to talk about a few rules and give you advice about placing objects and lights within your scene to spice up your work. I'm not going to go through all the rules of composition, and Blender Guru has already done a fantastic video on composition which I'll link to in the description. Within that he talks about many of the rules that I'll go through here. So let's look at the original image, and this was sent to me by Goosebumps on my Discord server, and they wanted to know what I thought and maybe give some advice. First of all, it's worth saying that this is an incredible image and it's really great what they've done. They've used an asset pack or a kit and they brought all these items in together to make this nice composition. So what have I changed and why? So let's take a closer look at my scene here. Now I'm not saying this is the best scene, and this was produced fairly quickly because we had the base already there, but hopefully it will give you some ideas how you can improve your composition in your work. So first of all, let's think about the objects in the scene. Now if you look at the original stag up on the hill here, we can see the outline of the shape. Our eyes are drawn to this area because it's the brightest part of the image, and it's a really nice focal point. But as you can see in mine, I think we need the stag right on top of the hill so we can see the full outline. So a great idea adding the stag, but make sure it's on the top so we can see that outline. And that's just positioning of your objects so that they can reach their full potential. The second thing I notice is that we've got this blank area here in the foreground. So we've got some nice depth with the buildings and sort of junk at the front here, but I felt it needed something in the foreground to continue that depth forward. And we can see that I've got a few objects here that I've just copied and pasted in. And you can also see that this caravan, or whatever it is, I've cut out from here and moved over to here. As you can see there, this barrel is copied from there and the caravan has moved from here to there. Now why have I moved it from there to here? Well, we've got the idea of leading lines in composition. And it's a really common mistake that I see lots of people make. So just quickly, what are leading lines? Well, classic examples are things like corridors where we can see into the photo and have some sort of depth that I was talking about. So you've got lines that are going and following a pathway through your image or composition. And here's another one here, just using walls to bring the viewer's eye into these focal areas. So I've tried to create a leading line or pathway in this case, just coming through here, up and around, to the other deer here. The other thing that's worth pointing out is this sort of rule of thirds, and we could even have this particular deer on a top third around here. And you can see this deer here that I've put on the other side, another focal point on those lines. Here's a very simple image of the rule of thirds explained, and you've got your focal points on these different thirds, particularly on the points where those third lines cross. Having said that, I'm not a big fan of this image because I feel like it's fairly flat. It hasn't got any leading lines. So could the photographer use this particular line down here, or the river as well, to create leading lines into the photo? So the other aspect is that I don't feel like we've got a good focal point down here. It's very busy. So I created a simple focal point at this point, another deer in this case. It also creates a slight story where maybe there's a herd of deers going through this pathway up to the end here. Again, adding to that sort of leading lines idea. So we've got focal points and we've got the idea of leading lines and depth. The next aspect that I really want to focus on a lot is lighting. And that's really all photography is about, lighting and composition. So it's the same with our 3D scenes. Composition and lighting are as important as our objects and textures. So I'll take apart the lighting slightly. So you can see that it's very flat here. And in the original image, so we've got very sort of even light from our HDRI here, not many shadows, and we've got a very strong light over here, which is a great idea, by the way, having a backlight focused on a focal point like this deer. Excellent thinking, and I want to make the most of that. We've even got some shafts of light coming through the tree. So over to my image, which is changed very slightly with some of the positioning of the objects and adding a focal point here. How can we therefore light this to give it a bit more depth and more points of interest? Now remember that your eyes focus on the light areas. So with this image, we're most likely to look at this area here first and then this area second, which is all fine. I feel like there's a bit too much light at the top here, which is possibly drawing our eye. So I did a simple crop and just brought the frame in slightly. Now let's build up some of the layers. We can see some shadows here. So the light's coming down from here and hitting the floor And obviously this is drawn over in Photoshop. How would you do that in Blender? Well, we want an extra light coming in here, but focus it. So we want a spotlight on this sort of area. The other thing you can do is shine a spotlight through an object. So here you can see me adding a plane and a spotlight. Cut a few holes in your plane and then shine the spotlight through it. I'm just using the principled volume shader into the world volume. Make sure your light is nice and bright, and you should be able to see those streaks of light coming through. And you can change the fog, or you can change the light color. That will help with these shafts of light. So just have a plane with a few holes in that you shine the spotlight through, and it will get this dappled effect on the ground, which you can see here, and then create some light shafts as well. And I'm trying to focus these light shafts onto my focal area here. So the spotlight coming down from here, focusing onto our deer. You can fake this, maybe putting some slight lights just in front of the deer to make sure that certain areas are highlighted. And it's okay to do that sort of thing. Bring in extra lights where you need them. Just make sure they don't bounce onto other areas too much. So next I've done a slight sort of vignette around my frame, just painted in these areas a bit darker. So we would want the light coming from over here to avoid hitting these areas. Now that's easier said than done. If we go back to our original image, the HDRI in the background is obviously lighting these areas. And I would actually want to turn that HDRI down fairly low so I can bring out the areas that I want with extra lights rather than having it all filled in with one HDRI. So you can see that vignette there where I've just painted in a bit of darkness, so we'd avoid those areas with our extra lights that we add. So to sum up the lighting aspects, we want an extra strong light up here. We want to bring down our HDRI and hide the light away from these other areas. Maybe have an extra light shining through what we call a cookie or flag. Those are the objects that we put in front of our light to create these light shafts, and we're adding a bit of depth. The last phase is to add contrast and color. In this case, I've added a bit of warmth, and that's just with a photo filter over the top. And you can easily do that in any sort of composition program or in the Blender compositor, or you can put some color into your lights. The curves give it a fair bit of contrast, making the light bits slightly lighter and the dark bits slightly darker. And you can do that very easily in the render settings. Down to the color management, you should be on Filmic by default, and there's a look which is high contrast or medium contrast. If you're taking this into another program, then just keep it at medium contrast or none. That will give it its most dynamic range, and then you can add the contrast in those other programs. The vibrancy is giving it a very tiny bit of color, but you can hardly notice the difference. Lots of these changes should be small and subtle and build up slowly. This is possibly a bit over the top, and there's further I would want to go if this was my piece. And I would focus my efforts on trying to get this focal element popping out of the frame by using these extra lights in here, so we've got a great point of interest. So with all those changes, you can see that I've gone from this fairly flat scene here, which is still very good, and into a more potentially interesting scene here, following a few of those rules. So thanks very much to Goosebumps for lending me their piece. Hopefully that makes sense to you, and hopefully some of you out there have learned something about composition from this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.